So now we're on to the consent agenda, and I'd first like to ask if there's any public comment on the consent agenda. Seeing none, I want to move on to the approval of the consent agenda. But before doing that, are there any items that any of the trustees wish to remove from the consent agenda for discussion or consideration? And I think, Barbara, you had one, and I'm 16, okay. Any other trustees wish to have anything removed from the consent agenda?
Sorry, 16.
Which one?
I thought the communication is
Yeah. Yeah, 13. Okay, I just noticed that too. Okay.
It's 13 something.
13 what?
Anything else? Okay. Let's see then. Can I ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is this a roll call vote? I always have to check on that. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, that passed. And now we'll move on to the superintendent report.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight for my report, as I've said in the past, I like to focus on some of the values that I have put forth as who I am in my announcement. And so tonight, I'd like to talk about the value of caring, finding the humanity in each other, and reaching out with a kind word of support or holding space for another to listen can have a tremendous impact on those you know and those you don't know. I'd like to focus on this particularly because September is National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. In our district, we've chosen to do a more extended campaign than just a month or a week. And this year, that'll include training for all staff on suicide prevention, in-depth school site activities at times of heightened anxiety for teens, such as college application deadlines, final exams, and college acceptance windows. And we're also going to disseminate the newly developed crisis response manual. So some of the things that we're going to be focusing on under student wellness and why we've targeted our suicide prevention awareness weeks to November and December. So given the tragedies of last December in our district and across the county, beginning in October, we're going to engage staff, students, and parents in various activities to raise awareness around suicide prevention. We're targeting our Suicide Awareness Week to the end of November and early December for a few reasons. One, finals and holidays tend to be times of heightened anxiety for people struggling with stress and mental health issues. And two, December marks the one-year anniversary of the student Gabe Hooley's death from suicide at Drake and will likely cause renewed pain for many, most specifically those who knew him. As in years past, Tamalpais Union High School District Wellness and Counseling Programs will be spearheading these in-depth suicide prevention and mental health awareness campaigns. These campaigns are developed collaboratively with students on each site, and they raise awareness, but they also show our youth that there's always support available to them and their friends throughout the school year. This year, Marin County Schools, the Department of Health and Human Services, and Kaiser Permanente spent the summer collaborating on the development of a crisis response suicide prevention and postvention protocols. The resources were developed with the goal of streamlining prevention and postvention across the county for our youth. So in the next few weeks, Senior Director of Student Services Wes Cedros, who was a member of the county team that developed the Crisis Response Protocols Manual, will be attending staff meetings at each site to share the resource. The protocols have been introduced to student services staff as well as administration last week. During the month of October, every staff member will be required to complete an online learning module on suicide prevention and awareness, and that is provided by Keenan and Associates. Additionally, the Wellness and Counseling Program is sponsoring a film series, which begins on October 9th with the movie Angst, which was made to raise awareness of teen anxiety, which can be a cause of suicide. The movie I Am Maris, about a teen who struggled with Depression, Anxiety, and Eating Disorders will be shown on November 27th. Both movies have a panel discussion afterwards and are part of the Teen Wellness Film Series. In late November and early December, each school site will run a suicide prevention awareness campaign with resources for students and parents. Additionally, throughout December, sites will share information on stress reduction and healthy coping skills. There will also be mental health screening and student education on knowing the signs and helping friends. And in the spring, we're going to follow up the online staff training with an in-person reinforcement training on recognizing the signs of suicide. We also have a comprehensive mental health awareness classroom workshops, including programs such as Signs of Suicide and Questions, Persuade, Respond, which is QPR, to reinforce the message of finding help when needed and destigmatizing seeking such assistance. All of this information will go out to our parents and our community tomorrow, along with a link to suicide prevention and awareness resources that are linked on all of our websites as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. We'll now move on to item 12, trustee considerations. And first is the student recognition, introduction of student trustees. And that's for you.
Thank you. So we have some principals here tonight to introduce their student trustees and tell us a little bit about them. So if I could start with Kim Stifler from Tamalpais, if you could come forward and introduce your student trustee.
Thank you, Corbett. Hi, everyone. How are you? Good, good. Well, I am very honored to introduce Ms. Charlotte Pearson. She is our Tamalpais rep. She is an 11th grade student. She's in her second year at Tamalpais, so I told her she knows way more about the school than I might at this particular juncture. And I asked her what she likes to do for fun, and she said math. And I said, what? And she said math. And I said, wow. And you're going to have to tell me more, because she is the most amazing mathematician, and she is taking classes at College of Marin for accounting. She knows what she wants to do. She wants to be a CPA and a financial advisor, and I'm so impressed with that. And I said, what else do you do besides math? And she said, I study core. And I said, what else do you do besides math and study for core? And she said that she likes to hang out with friends and play volleyball for fun as well, and do art, right? Yes. So very pleased to have her joining the team, and thank you for providing her this opportunity.
David Luongo from San Andreas.
Oh, thank you, Corbett. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Luke Williams from San Andreas, junior at San Andreas. This is a young man destined for greatness. Luke is a deep thinker. He's got a critical lens, and he's extremely insightful. Luke is passionate about the arts, and ultimately he sees himself being a director or a producer someday in the film industry. In his spare time, he likes to travel. He spent a lot of time growing up in England, particularly in south of England. And when he's in Europe, he likes to go to France. In the Bay Area, he likes to travel to San Francisco. And he likes to travel around on what's called a one-wheel, which is an electronic skateboard kind of thing with a giant wheel in the middle. It's pretty cool. And that's a little bit about the great student from San Andreas, Luke Williams.
David Sondheim from Redwood.
That was the easiest applause I've gotten all year. Lauren Steele is a junior at Redwood. She runs cross country and track. She is a member of the leadership class. She writes for the school newspaper. She ran for the student trustee position in the hope of improving life at school for other students. She believes her role as a representative of her peers will benefit the rest of the student body and will give her the chance to become more involved in and informed about the decisions regarding her district. She hopes to be an accurate and reliable representative and aspires to be approachable and informative. As a representative of Redwood, she hopes to be a positive liaison between the district board, other schools, and RHS students. And I can say from even the first few weeks, we've met a couple times, and we've also had a number of parking discussions at our school recently, in case you haven't heard. And she has already shown that she has all the skills she needs to be a good representative and trustee. She listens, she shares and represents those that she represents very well. She uses creative thinking and critical thinking really well already in the first few weeks. So you will be as pleased as we are. We have had a history of great trustees, and you're going to follow right in their footsteps. So I hope you have a good time, and I know you will enjoy her. So good luck.
So unfortunately, Liz Seabury and J.C. Farr could not be here tonight, but rest assured they sent along some words. So from Liz Seabury at Drake, she says, Maddie is returning for her second year as Drake High School student trustee. Maddie is a junior and is an awesome board member. She loves all of her classes, but she really enjoys French. Maddie ran for the board to give a voice to students who might not otherwise have a voice in the decisions that are made. She is passionate about our student senate and will work this year to make sure that the body has a strong connection with the TUHSD board. She is also a distinguished actress, and we are all proud to call her a pirate. And from Tam High's J.C. Farr, he'd like to introduce Kara. Kara not only is heavily involved with ASB, she is also a central figure in both the TAM Unity Committee work and our SOAR, which is Students Organized Against Racism program at Tam High. In working with Kara, I have found her to be thoughtful, conscientious, and responsible. Kara will be an amazing student trustee, and I'm thrilled to have her representing TAM. Thank you. That's all of them. Thank you, principals.
And you're up next, so I won't move the microphone for the staffing ratio report.
Thank you. Good evening again, trustees. So each semester, the Office of Educational Services and HR brings forth what we call our staffing ratios. And essentially what this, Mary, do we have the? Yeah. Thank you. Essentially what this document tells us is, as you can see from it, the enrollment of students in classes in a given department, the number of FTE, which stands for full-time equivalent teachers in that department, the number of sections running within that department, the average class size, and then the average teacher load. With our bargaining unit, Tamalpais Federation of Teachers, we have an agreement to not have larger than a certain caseload within any department. So if you see the department limit at the bottom, that is the average that each teacher across a department is allowed to have as a total caseload, meaning across all 5 classes. Okay, so what we have for you is the existing staffing ratios for our 3 comprehensives for this fall as of the 19th of September. And we've also provided last spring's staffing ratio as a comparison. And what you'll notice is that, as promised, we have staffed tighter than we did in the past. We're still within our ratios, but we have gotten closer to those ratios as part of our cost savings measures. Are there any questions?
I have a question. Tara, do you think it would be useful to, because I know that these are ratios, I guess let me start with a question. These are ratios that were enrolled as of first day of school?
No, this was as of September 19th.
Right. So does this reflect, because I know after the start of school, there's always some shakeout. And do you think that this is a date by which this is a pretty accurate snapshot of what the ratios are likely to be through the course of the semester?
I do think so. I mean, usually by, grades are closing this week for our first quarter, or our first grading period. So I think, by about 4 weeks in, most of the schedules have settled. That is still within the drop deadline though, so some students could still drop courses. What we can do is bring it back, run another one after the drop deadline for comparison to see if there's a significant impact for students potentially dropping elective courses or something like that.
Yeah, I think that might be help. And then when you do that, if you could also include this one again, so that we could see we could see what the changes are. Thank you.
I have a question, and I think this might be helpful with our new student trustees on board. We have the 3 comprehensive sites here, and I know that San Andreas and Temescal, different setup, but are we looking at
We
the
do.
class sizes at those 2 sites as well, and
We-
what is that looking like?
I don't have that report in front of me, but they have different staffing ratios at those sites, and so those are done a little bit differently. And their populations also fluctuate a little more, so it's for example, in the spring, San Andreas is usually larger than they are in the fall, so it fluctuates a little more. And Temescal has a cap, so we would be looking at, are we over the cap or not? So it's a pretty straightforward.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Barbara, do you have something?
I'm not sure if it really relates to staffing ratios as it is my ancient memory about the number of sections typically that English used to run. And it looks like we are shifting clearly to the STEM emphasis. And it looks like there are English classes, I don't know if it looks less, there are fewer sections, it seems to me. And there are more sections, obviously, of the math science area as we are addressing the new standards. But I also I'm wondering if social studies has also increased. Do you know that, Tara, if it has? Number of sections or an offerings
I can
in social
look at it.
studies?
The offerings are up in social studies.
Is that by mandate?
No, although, both English and social studies in our district have a 4-year requirement, so there's that. And UCs tend to drive some more of the science and math,
Yeah.
continuous enrollment. But it is interesting. I think if you look at Redwood's English sections, they actually have more
Yeah.
sections in either social studies or science. So it also varies a little bit by site.
Thank you.
And, Redwood's got some pretty tasty English electives.
They do.
So,
I think most of the sites have
and,
shared the
I
same
think
ones.
that might account for the difference. They've got more in English than in social studies, whereas the other 2 schools, I think kids may tend to go for the social studies electives.
Good point.
Just also speak for Drake, we have recently added a couple of electives, and I think they're mostly science and social studies, so that might have been, there might also be an influx this year if everyone wants to try out the new electives.
It's a good point. That it does tend to sort of have a little bit of a wave to it.
Thank you.
I do have a question. I'm just picking one. Math at Drake. The average teacher load is 122 and the department limit is 150. So when we see numbers like that, what will your staff do with that number? Will you?
We will staff tighter next year. And I think one of the things that we're going to do this year that we haven't done extensively in the past is we're going to try to capture the pattern of drops for students. To see if we can look over the last couple of semesters and try to factor that in when we are staffing and scheduling. Because I know I've heard from a couple of principals that were surprised that they felt like this year, this semester in particular, there was a sort of slew of drops that they weren't expecting that dropped some of their numbers just recently. And we do have. We have 3 years of math, but we do have, math electives and things. So it's just trying to figure out where we started when we, started back in August and where we landed now to see if we can figure out some sort of formula to help us with that.
So what happens, I'm just sort of envisioning, and students, you can help with this too. If I'm in a math class at Drake and there are lots of drops the first week, and it turns out that the class has only like 15 students in it. Does Principal Seabury try to maybe move some kids who are next door in the same class? The class is closer to 28 into my class.
Yeah, we do try to balance, but we don't want to disrupt a student's schedule. Particularly at Drake, it's a small enough school that there may not be multiple sections of the same course in the same period. But sometimes you might have a direct flip, like you might have, this math class second period and this Spanish class fourth period, and those might match, so you might be able to flip some kids to balance. But they do try to balance out numbers. And if it doesn't happen now, it often will happen at the semester, where you
Okay.
have a little more room to shift some bodies around.
So now it's September 25th, and most of that flipping and flopping, that's already, everything's
Yeah,
stabilized?
there's still some drops happening, and there might be still some minor changes happening through the next 2 weeks, but the schedules are pretty set at this
Okay.
point.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have any public comment on this? Any other? Okay, why don't we move on to the school safety plan update with Wes Cedros?
So friendly. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you and welcome new student trustees. I am going to give a very brief update on comprehensive school safety plans, and this is timely because we have, as you'll see in the presentation, we have an update that needs to go to the county within the next week. So we're rushing to get that. We're rushing to get that done. Go ahead. Yeah. So very briefly. Very briefly, this mandate comes from SB 187, and the key components of that are that we need to develop a comprehensive school safety plan relevant to the needs and resources of the school district. These safety plans must be evaluated and amended as needed on an annual basis. They must be reviewed by school staff annually, and then we need to complete an annual update and evaluation of the school safety plan and send that. We send it to the county. County compiles and sends a report to CDE. The timeline, a couple of just the key dates. October 1st, as I mentioned, our compliance audit form is due to MCOE. They in turn, they need a couple weeks. They have an October 15th deadline to then turn that over to the state. And then by March 1st, we need to update our comprehensive school safety plan and get it approved by this board. Just a little accounting of the work completed. Those policy updates that I come up here and give every once in a while, there's a method to the madness. We need to update some of these. So our child abuse reporting procedures were updated just this month. Sexual harassment and gender discrimination policies are also part of the comprehensive safety plan, and those were updated last March, or March 2017. Bullying policies were also re-updated this month. And then our school site emergency drill schedules have been set. In progress, active shooter protocol and training, I'll go in very briefly to that we will be doing threat assessment teams, planning for that, and then planning meetings with local law enforcement and fire department leadership to establish safety protocols. The active shooter protocol, run, hide, fight. I'm sure you probably all heard about that, if not here through the press. But that is a protocol for an active shooter or an intruder on campus. And staff training will take place this fall. There are some good training materials and also an outstanding video by the CSU that CSUs have put out. This is what will be placed inside the doors or by the telephones of each classroom. This is the cheat sheet, so very simple, bold instructions. There's a longer, there's more detailed protocol that will also be a part of the safety plan. It's consistent with our feeder districts. That's most important for our kids. So my kids at elementary school were taught a version of this called Run Like a Rabbit. So that's for little kids. But the idea being that when the call goes out over the intercom, if you're out on the field or whatever, then you scatter and you run erratically. So not like in the old days where you come back to the school or you run away from the threat. And it's also consistent with Department of Homeland Security best practice. There's two main programs, ALICE, and I knew I would blank on what that stands for, but ALICE and Run, Hide, Fight, and they're at the heart, they're basically the same. Threat assessment teams, I go into a little more detail with this because this is new, or at least codifying it in our practice is new. But the threat assessment team is for the prevention of school violence, and it's a structured group process that is used to evaluate the risk posed by a student or another person in response to an event or a perceived threat. And we use it in order to make an informed judgment on two key questions: just how credible and serious the threat is, and to what extent does the individual appear to have resources, intent, and motivation to carry out the threat. And then based upon that analysis and work with the group, we come up with a plan of action.
What initiates the meeting of the teams?
There we go. Whenever there's an indication that an individual or group of individuals is planning to carry out targeted school violence. Now, this does not replace calling 911 if you see someone. This is when a situation is kids are talking about a student who has made a threat, vague or otherwise. We meet to evaluate that threat. So we gather information about that individual, we look into it, we investigate it, and then we determine a course of action. The site-level threat assessment team typically includes psychologists, counselor, administrators, our school resource partners, juvenile probation officers if they're available and if it warrants, and then any other individuals with knowledge of a student's behavior and social emotional functioning. We have assembled these teams before, and you don't hear about it a lot because of confidentiality reasons, but as I introduced this to the student services team last week, and Jamie Nash from Adult School was nice enough to remind me that we did just this 2 or 3 years ago with a threat that her school was facing, followed very similar protocols, and the threat was taken care of, and it did result in law enforcement action. Whoops. Did I? I'm not. No. No, I wanted to go forward.
I think that's the last slide.
That's the last slide.
Yeah.
That's it.
That it?
On mine, it's the
Yeah.
last one, yeah.
Not on mine. I had 2 more. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Really, all that's left is just how does the team work. First, we secure campus, notify the threat assessment team. The team members then gather information. We convene the team to talk about it and complete the school violence risk assessment checklist, determine appropriate action plan, and then a key piece of it is preparing for after the threat is resolved. So how do we reintegrate the if we make the example a student, how do we reintegrate the student back into campus life safely, and how do we provide school and community resources for that person, as well as any possible victims or anyone who's experienced any trauma because of that, and then how do we monitor and manage that ongoing. So it's not, we don't drop it there, but we continue to follow up with the situation. And so that was it.
Excuse me, Wes,
Yeah.
I think I understood there was a, I don't know if it was active shooter at one of our feeder schools? Was it this
Bayside.
past week? Or last
Bayside,
week?
Marin
Bayside.
City.
Yeah.
Oh,
They were in lockdown.
down, yeah. Right, it's a little different, yeah.
Okay, so, all right, thank you.
I have a question, Wes, and that is the staff training in the fall coming up. Is that for classified too?
Everybody needs to be a part of that. Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're the campus supervisor and do they have specific, like different training than,
Campus
say, a
supervisors-
biology teacher?
They have the same training, and Lars can help me out. They have the same training, but they do fulfill a certain role. So our campus supervisor staff do fulfill a certain role, as well as administrators.
Correct. Good evening. We also recently, last spring, we put all of our campus assistants from all of our school sites through a multiple-day training seminar that addressed just this and beyond, actually. We did it through our adult education program. Jamie Nash set it up for us. We brought law enforcement officials from down in Fresno who specialize in training such as this, specific to school personnel. So they all went through a very robust training. And we will put any new hires we have in those positions through the same training. We'll likely have to send them there. We brought them to us and put them up in a hotel for a couple of days because we had 16 people roughly. But yeah, we'll continue with that group and train the new folks that come on board.
Okay, thank you. And what about coaches, after-school programs? If something happens on site with an active shooter and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon,
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
we?
We have not traditionally trained.
And that,
that's,
yeah.
That's a very good idea.
And that, I know we talked about that last spring when that happened at the neighborhood adjacent to Tam High, and there were the alerts going out for people to shelter in place, and yet we had athletes outside playing tennis and baseball, and I believe the administrators went and gave them the option to go into the auditorium, but it'd be nice for us to really look at a firm policy, because it was one of those first-time situations. So I think
Yeah,
that
I think you will do that.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I have a couple questions, and this is maybe more of something to think about. I can't remember which one of you I was talking to about this, but you know, it's really common now at work. And I was just at a meeting yesterday where before we start the meeting, someone raises their hand and they're going to be the person that does CPR. Then they say, who's going to call 911? I'll call 911. Who's going to go outside and wait for the ambulance? I'll do that. And someone's writing it down on the board before we start the meeting, and then often it'll be, if there's an earthquake, get under the table. And then if it's active shooter, it's get out, take out, or get out, hide out, or take out. You know, it's like the kind of a quick way of saying it. And then where everyone's supposed to congregate. And what's nice about that, and in fact, one meeting I was at when they were talking about if a shooter came, take your everyone says, okay, just take the conference table and throw it up and then run out. And it takes just a couple minutes, but I hadn't really thought about it, how often when something happens, everyone's, 5 of you go dial 911. And it might be something, just think about it. I don't know how you would apply it here, but we might want to think about it for our meetings. Just have that decided ahead of time, and you know, I just think it might be a really good idea. So,
Thank you for that.
yeah, and yeah, thank you for the idea about the after school, because I know we had a lot of discussions about that
Yeah.
as a general policy. So the administrators or whoever's on campus, they don't have to even think about it. They just know that this is what happens. So.
While we're on the board meeting topic, and it's very calm out there now, I think it would be good for us to know, I think we talked about this last year, that if we have a situation in a board meeting, you guys weren't here for that, but that we
This door
shoot out
right
that
here.
door.
Yeah, we keep it clear
like,
now.
Don't hide under
Yeah.
here, we go out that door.
Right. So.
I have a question. So last year we had several instances at least 2 schools of anonymous threats.
Yeah.
And how does that fit in? How does this plan address anonymous threats?
The anonymous threats were an immediate call to law enforcement. So since we did not know it was anonymous, we didn't know where the threat was coming from, and the threats, is David still? Oh, David's not here. Were not particularly vague. We just called law enforcement immediately and had them run the investigation into that. That's not something that we would take on. And the threat assessment team, it's an ad hoc body, so we're not meeting every week to assess threats, but only when we hear. Corey knows because he hears kids all day. I'm just picking on Corey, but counselors hear things all day. Our custodians and our cafeteria workers hear things. Our anybody that comes in contact with kids can hear things, and more we get things on the confidential tip line that we need to follow up and pursue. That do name specific individuals. Some of those we run out pretty quickly, there's nothing to it, and others require a more concerted effort. And so this would be the more concerted effort when we're really trying to piece together what kind of services and supports can we provide a kid while keeping everybody else safe.
But Wes,
Yeah.
if we go back maybe a couple of slides too, because this is billed as our.
Yes.
Not everything in this, again, right, even to the first page, right? Not everything in this presentation deals with specific threats and assessing and dealing with threats posed by a specifically identified student or other party, but this is a comprehensive school safety plan.
Oh, yes, and there's.
And so, that's what I'm trying to get at, is do we have accepted protocols other than just simply calling law enforcement? When we know we've dealt with this last year, right? What about, what's the direction with respect to communicating with staff, about communicating with parents, communicating with students?
Yes, that's all part of the comprehensive school safety plan, is the protocols for doing just that. So I was just highlighting 2, I think, kind of new pieces of the school plan, which is really training people on the run, hide, fight protocol rather than the simple shelter in place or lockdown, and then solidifying our threat assessment protocol. But everything that you can think of is in that comprehensive school safety plan. The different kinds of threats: fire, earthquake, school shooter, and how we communicate about those, as well as things that you wouldn't really, that I wouldn't think of in a school safety plan, which is like the non-discrimination and bullying policies and practices that we use, how we report about dangerous students, how we report to teachers about dangerous students. So this is really just a very small piece.
Could I add something too? We also, we have established protocols with our law enforcement partners around timing of communication and coordination of communication. So all of that is part of the safety plan too, and there's like bullet lists of what you do in what order. And we have templates for all different types of scenarios already ready to go, just needing to plug in specific information. so that you're not trying to do your best thinking in a time of sort of heightened anxiety and pressure. So we have all of those accessible to all of our admin team.
I have a question, Wes, about, say we have something where we have to keep students and staff on sites for whatever reason. I don't pick a reason, but do we have, I know when I was involved in the elementary, middle school volunteer force, we had portables with, emergency supplies, water, food, all that. Do we have that here
Yeah.
on each site?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, they're storage containers.
Storage containers, I haven't come across them. It's not been one of my jobs.
And then in each classroom, we have the buckets.
Oh, yeah.
And the backpacks, yeah.
But we have food and we go through and make sure everything's up to, no expiration dates have come and gone?
I hope so.
Supposed
Yeah.
to.
Okay,
That's great. Yeah, they're doing that.
thank you.
That's great. How often do you check the hotline, or do you automatically get
We
pinged?
automatically get.
You get it, okay,
Yeah.
good.
Each school has a person or a couple of people designated to receive that, receive those calls.
So student trustees, do you have any comments or questions? Do you generally feel safe at school? Good. Good. Okay, thank you very much. I'm really glad you're making such progress. That's great. Okay, the next item is Lars and Corbett, and you'll be presenting the Fiscal Advisory Committee and Budget Update. Okay.
Hi, everybody, from this side. Thought I'd stand up. So we just wanted to give a quick update on the progress of the Fiscal Advisory Committee and the LCAP Committee. The LCAP Committee will meet for the second time next week, so I don't have an update on them yet. But Corbett and Lars will give you a little
What
bit
does
more.
the LCAP committee
Sorry,
stand for?
LCAP
Oh, yeah,
is Local
LCAP.
Control and Accountability Plan Committee, which does not meet until next week. So some of the updates we did want to provide you is that we sent out a SurveyMonkey survey just this week for feedback on budget priorities as well. So we're getting feedback on topics both in the Local Control and Accountability Plan as well as for the Fiscal Advisory Committee. And we sent it out to the parents, the students, and the staff. It went out on Monday. And just before we came in, I checked our feedback, and so far we've had 660 parent responses, 300 student responses.
That's great.
Good job. And 124 staff. So one of your jobs could be to encourage your fellow classmates and schoolmates to fill out the survey. We really do want to have student feedback. It's really important because in there is you can select budget priorities that, have all sorts of topics that you can select from. So we're very excited about that. The survey is open until October 5th. We will be compiling that data. We will be able to disaggregate it by school. So that will be really nice. And that data will inform both the Local Control and Accountability Plan Committee as well as the Fiscal Advisory Committee as they move forward and make recommendations.
That's great. That's
Yep.
really great.
Thank you. So Corbett and Lars are going to tell you a little bit more about our most recent meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Topier. We had a very positive meeting, not last night, but the previous Monday. Fiscal Advisory Group, Michael and Laura sit on that committee as observers. Corey is a participant representing TFT. We each had a component of the presentation that evening. I had the responsibility for, for lack of a better title, just Contract 101. I think it's important as we have really difficult discussions about some potential reductions, given our fiscal challenges, to make sure that advisory council truly understands that we have collective bargaining agreements. We have, number one, we have bargaining associations too. And with those associations come collective bargaining agreements. And, many times an idea, it certainly is worthy of merit, but it can't be done in a vacuum, and it's negotiable. And those contracts are a book of promises to our employees, and it's important that we adhere to those promises. So we just went through a very rudimentary, again, contract 101, collective bargaining 101, bargaining association 101 conversation with the group. It went well, I thought. There were some good questions. And we look forward to a meeting this coming Monday, a week from yesterday. So where we'll continue the process of, eventually coming up with recommendations to the superintendent with some potential reductions, given, as I say, our fiscal challenges. So, Corbett?
Thank you, Lars. What I wanted to do, if I back up, it's okay, it's fine. I'm doing something weird. It's okay. So what I want to do is give the board and the student trustees a little flavor of what the conversation was that night. So I think it's helpful for us all to hear it multiple times, but for there to be some interaction between the fiscal advisory group, the board, and our student trustees. So I'm going to briefly run through a couple of the exercises we did. But the first meeting, we reviewed what our LCAP goals are. We have 4 major goals that our community has identified as things we want to work towards. That's much at like a 10,000-foot level, very high level. So we went through an exercise where we wanted to get from maybe the 10,000-foot level to the 5,000-foot level, and begin to go through a prioritization where we get a feel from the group. What are the things they feel are most important? And as Lars has said many times, there are very few things in our district that are not invaluable. But as a prioritization, we kind of want to force people to kind of lean in and say, okay, these are the things that are maybe mission critical, mission supportive, and mission related. So for each of our LCAP goals, we brought forward maybe some 5,000-foot level examples. You have to remember, in the fiscal advisory group, we have parents, we have community members, we have people with all various levels of familiarity with schools. So we want to make sure we have a shared experience of what people's understanding is before we get into details. So just to give you a little bit of flavor, goals 1 and 2, which we reviewed with the group the week before, stated here, we gave some broad examples, A through F, of some common things across all of our schools. I'm not going to read them to you, but things that make our district who we are and align to goals 1 and 2 of our LCAP. Please note the other is a very important piece. We opened up to the group for them to add additional ideas, which they did. So we provided those examples. Goal 3, which is community relations, which is very important, but from a kind of a financial point of view, there's not a big ticket cost associated with that. But moving on to goal 4, which is student wellness, we identified some examples, not exhaustive at all, but some examples related to that. So what we had each group do, the prioritizing exercise, we reviewed the goals. We got all individuals got a worksheet where they went through their own prioritization internally and identified were they mission critical, mission supported, or mission related. They broke into groups of 3, had a discussion for maybe 5, probably 10 or 15 minutes, and then they reported out their feelings so people could get an idea broadly where we were with the group. I took those individual worksheets, if you will, and the next meeting, which is coming up this upcoming Monday, we want to go from maybe the 5,000-foot level to the 2,000-foot level, where we're going to bring back some maybe more specific examples or sub-examples for each one, and then some related costs associated with that. So that's where we're going to begin to merge what our priorities are in the district and where the dollars are associated with that. So it's a common experience that we're going through together. So that would be a big activity we'll do at our upcoming fiscal advisory meeting. Briefly, as I mentioned at the last board meeting, I did do a quick rundown of our unaudited actuals for the student body, or student trustees, I should say. What this means is that, as Trustee Futterman mentioned, our fiscal year kind of runs with a calendar year, meaning our last year's budget ended June 30th, and we make a prediction of where we think we ended up, meaning here's our revenues, here's our expenditures, what's the difference? We made a prediction, an estimation in June. But my office over the course of summer, they they turn the prediction into actuals. We close all the accounts, process all the payments, and find out where we actually are. So I briefly reviewed that with the fiscal advisor group. As you guys have seen before, we knew we were going to have an operating deficit last school year. We estimated in June we spent $6.2 million more than we were taking in. That's called an operating deficit, when you're spending more than you're receiving in. Well, we were $1.3 million for the better, so where we estimated we'd be and where we ended up was $1.3 million for the better. That's a very positive thing, but still with that difference, we still ended up, the actual deficit for last school year was roughly $5 million. So we went through that with the fiscal advisory group so they had an understanding of what that meant. That $1.3 million, as we talked about, was a significant amount of money relative to our $90 million budget to 1.2, here you go, Charlotte, 1.27 million divided by 90 million equals 1.97%. That's 1.97% off of our estimate. That relative to 90 million is pretty accurate. So we just reviewed with them plus or minus 2%, which that is relatively good for our industry in terms of being accurate. And then this is an important slide. Again, I'm reviewing with every single group so they see multiple times. Board included, fiscal advisor included, and now I want the student trustees to have a voice and understand. The slide summarizes a lot of the key points of our district right now with our fiscal situation. As Trustee Futterman mentioned, we've added 1,200 new students over the last 10 years. That's like another Drake High School. But since we're basic aid, we do not get a lot of extra revenue associated with that. As a result, we have an operating deficit for this school year and 2 years out at roughly $8 million, $8.7 million, and $9.7 million. So that is significant relative to our overall budget. Our reserve, you're going to hear that term a lot this upcoming year, or fund balance. It's synonymous, but just think it's like your savings account. Okay, you've set money aside for a rainy day fund. Our previous boards and this board has built up the reserve, so we had time as this enrollment growth came up to make thoughtful decision making with our stakeholders. But as a result, our reserve has been going down over the last few years from roughly $25 million a couple years ago. This year it's starting at $17.7 million. But at the rates of those operating deficits, our reserve, our savings account will be depleted. It'll be zero by 2020-21. So that's why we have a sense of urgency this year to get ideas of how to potentially reduce some costs and maybe raise revenue. So the solution that we've talked about with all groups that you guys have heard multiple times is as you see that mathematics equation, we need that operating deficit of $7.9 million at the top, let's call it roughly $8 million. We have to close that gap. And there's only two ways of closing that gap: raising revenue or reducing costs. And this board in July, we have a parcel tax measure on the November ballot that, if passed by the community, will raise $5.1 million annually. So I don't know if this has a laser pointer on it or not. It does. So see that $5 million there? That's the increase in revenue if the voters approve that. But unfortunately, that $5 million does not cover the $8 million gap we have. Therefore, even if the parcel tax passes, we still need to look at reducing costs by $3 million. And unfortunately, if the parcel tax doesn't pass, then we have a much larger gap to close, reducing costs at $8 million. So that's a significant number. So I just went through that. One of my themes as I do this is redundancy. I think it helps people understand it. Understanding leads to being part of a solution as opposed to maybe distrust of what the numbers mean. So I'm going to keep bringing this back with every single group. And with you as student trustees, I want to make sure you understand this as well. Very briefly, I'm continuing to meet with sites. I'm going out to Tamalpais on Wednesday, next Wednesday, I should say, and then Tam High October 8th. And then a brief budget update for you since the last board meeting. We've decided, again, looking at our mission and priorities, that we will be reducing 2 management positions in terms of the number of days. Our director of nutrition is going to have, that position will be reduced from 215 days to 210 days. That's effective January 1st because she'll be retiring. Further, our director of community programs at the end of the school year, we're going to be reducing that by 8 days, from 225 to 217 days. And then lastly, as a reminder, December is a really important date. That's when all school districts have to provide a report to the board and the community on this year's school budget. That'll be an important date because a lot of the savings and actions we've taken this school year will be represented there. But more importantly, the parcel tax revenue or not will be included. So that would be an important snapshot for the community to know where we stand in December. Therefore, what actions do we need to take this spring? So I just want to provide another quick little. And then I created this as a new slide that's a little bit of a tracking tool. I know it's hard for everyone, me included, to track all the actions we've been taking from board meeting to board meeting. So this is just a quick little summary that I've been utilizing in Cabinet. It states our net savings goal of $3 million if the parcel tax passes in the top. And to date, we've identified roughly $887,000 of net savings. So the gap is $2.1 million more. I'm not going to read to you all the things that we've taken so far, but you've seen these before. Again, the net piece is that we have additional special ed transportation costs of 17.5 students. So that's actually an increased cost of $136,000. These are all ongoing costs because we have an ongoing financial challenge. Things that ongoing means year after year we can achieve these unless we decide otherwise. On the bottom, you see a one-time implemented action where our former superintendent had a housing loan that was returned back to the district when he left his property. That's not going back out to our current superintendent. So that savings of $500,000 is one-time savings coming in.
Sorry.
So that's just a little summary slide that helps encapsulate a lot of these things we've been talking about. Barbara.
Would you explain to students what typically what our personnel costs are, and then how we may be moving towards, cutting. Anyway, I'm babbling. Sorry, I'm tired, but would you talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So as Lars affectionately says, we're a people-based business. We're in the profession of teaching and learning. So almost, if you look at our budget, which is $90 million, about 87% of that are people. Salaries, benefits, things associated with that. So that's why it's a people-based business. So last spring, the board, and in July, we looked at as many of the non-people-based expenditures that we could reduce. And you'll see some examples of that with the 10% and 25% site budgets and reductions. The challenge of that is that there's only so many non-people-based things you can look at because we still have to have textbooks and technology. So that's where a lot of the focus has been. Obviously, we'll have to have conversations on how to get to the $3 million, including looking at personnel as well.
Thank you.
And Barbara, really to address your question, not Corbett didn't, but to address your question directly, the unfortunate reality is that there are very few remaining meaningful reductions that won't somehow affect personnel. That is the world we're living in. And we talk about that at our committee. We talk about that in Cabinet. We talk about that with our bargaining associations. We're being as open and transparent as we possibly can be. We don't have a lot of stuff. We have people.
Thank you.
And we have reduced people as well, positions. Any other questions? And student trustees, please ask it. Fire away.
I have a clarifying question. Maybe you can't answer it tonight, but I heard it referenced, I guess maybe it was yesterday, the Mill Valley K-8 school district has a group that kind of acts as a fiscal advisory.
Yeah.
How is that different than what we're doing with our fiscal advisory, or is that something you want to supplement ours? I'm not really very familiar with it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I learned about that yesterday. My understanding is limited, but there's communities, Mill Valley, for example, where they have a smaller group of maybe 5 or 6 very interested individuals that are very passionate about public schools and have an area of expertise maybe in the areas of finance. And what that provides is, I don't want to use the word fiscal advisory, but it's, and they had some acronym that I forget.
Yeah, I can't remember it
But
either.
it's doing a little bit of the mid to long range planning that works closely with the superintendent or the CBO of a district. As Trustee Futterman mentioned, we are required to have a multi-year projection of 3 years, this year and 2 years out. The focus, what I heard, is thinking 3 to 5 years out, medium term, which I see a lot of value on.
Right.
I learned about this last night and it resonated with me. Where we're at right now, I think we need to have a larger group of 18 to 20 to 25 individuals to really get a common understanding and make recommendations for the now. But we've been talking a lot about, we not only needed to be talking about the now, but long-term fiscal sustainability. That's critical, and that's where I see a role with the group somewhat like that. On our parcel tax language, we are required to have citizens oversight of the new parcel tax passes. So there could be a role, maybe a commingling of those roles potentially, to provide that oversight and some advice. But that's something I learned about yesterday as well, and I'm interested in learning more.
You know, I know that in the past, there have been some meetings where we have looked ahead, closer to 4 to 5 years. And I know there's often some resistance or reticence from the CBOs because there's so much uncertainty with doing that. We don't want to give the impression to the public or the board that this is the way it's going to be when we're kind of at the mercy of what's happening at the state, and we don't know what our property taxes are going to do, so on and so forth. But I think it's worth doing regardless, so long as if we're concerned about it, someone misinterpreting it, if we just have a box on the Excel sheet that is very clear that this assumes X, Y, Z, this could change, and just have some disclaimers there, I think it would go a long way, because that's some of the feedback we've gotten. There's a perception out there that we have not done this, and we really have. It's not something that we've routinely released. It's been like a working Excel sheet that we've used during meetings, and I'm hoping we can do more of that. I think it'll help in the long term. So.
I personally speaking, I totally agree. I know we have been doing this. I've seen this multi-year beyond.
Right.
We haven't iterated with the public, and I understand some maybe CBO's perspective of being reticent. To me, I wouldn't be. I think that more information is better, and
as
you
long
acknowledge
as you have the
further out the assumptions. And you know what? Guess what? 5 years becomes 3 years out pretty quickly, and you adjust as you get closer.
Yeah.
So I think my role, I'm focusing on the immediate right now, but we're talking every decision, not only what's the immediate, but we have to think 3 to 5 years out as well. And that's where this group might have an important role as we look at issues coming down from Sacramento. When we look at enrollment coming up to the feeder schools, we always need to be in the immediate, but have our view out the horizon as well.
Well, I really appreciated that when we did that study 2 years ago. I know that, and it was with the FMP that they hired that
Facilities
subcontract.
Master Planning. Yep.
Right, that looked at 10 years out for the enrollment. And I think that was really money well spent. Even though we knew there's still uncertainty with that, we needed to look further. And so I think so I'm happy that you're making such progress on all these fronts. That's great.
I will say specific to the firm, that subcontractor who did that demographic study, Tara has been spot on with her enrollment figures over the past 3 years. I mean, it's literally almost to the person, but it does mirror that firm's numbers too.
Right, they're very close.
So I mean, they're right there together. So enrollment projections beyond 3 to 5 years are a bit dicey because there's so many other factors that can influence them.
But it's nice to have
But so
something.
far, they've been really spot on.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than, it's very helpful.
More information is better.
Yes, I agree.
I have 2 comments. One is I really like this tracking tool, and is this something that we will see every board meeting? Or
Sure. We were, I think, in a positive way, making steps each meeting. I felt like I want to keep you apprised every board meeting, and then I realized we're making some positive steps, and no one can track all this. So let's have one thing that tracks it, and I hope this continues to grow.
Well, it's such a focus, as we all know, and this keeps it nice and simple and transparent, and you can see progress that we're making towards that ultimate goal. So I really like that tracking tool.
Great. That's important feedback that it's clear.
And, you made me think of something else, because this also has come up over the last year or so, is that, we go from meeting to meeting, and we know where we left off, and we jump right in.
Right.
And it'd be nice to have, and again, for the community, to have a cover page that says, budget study committee, check. It's just a check meeting. We've done that. And just, and it just lays out where we've been and here's where we are now. And so it just reminds us how we got here.
Yeah.
That we didn't just.
The special ed audit.
The
Yeah,
cumulative
special
action.
ed,
Yeah.
and you don't have to spend any time on it. Say, as you recall, we've been here. I know that Michael has, numerous board meetings reminded everyone all the hard work that everyone's done. And I think it would really help everybody understand, because that's something we're learning, is that people weren't aware that how much work had been done in this area, and so they had a little bit of the shock factor, whereas we'd been in the thick of it for a long time, so.
Well, that's a great point. I'm, as you hopefully understand, I'm built in redundancy into these presentations
Yeah,
this
no, it's
fall,
good. You
but I
need to
speak
do that.
you,
Yeah.
I hear you speaking to longer-term redundancy from the past year.
Yeah, even if it's just one slide, just check,
Right.
check.
Great, that's
kind of thing.
something for me to think about.
Yeah, thank you.
The second comment I wanted to make as a member of the fiscal advisory group is that the prioritizing exercise that we went through the last time, I just wanted the rest of the board and the student trustees and whomever's listening out there to know that we, the two trustees that are on the fiscal advisory group, didn't participate in the prioritizing exercise, and nor did the administrative team. We just circulated about. So we didn't express what we felt were the high priorities, which I thought was appropriate.
Observers.
Any other questions? Student trustees, any questions from you?
Nothing?
And I think we have a public comment. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Cynthia Ronish, one of the people, community member, parent of Redwood graduates, and running for the Board of Trustees. So
Cynthia, could you- yeah.
I had a question, a couple questions about, or hopes, that you've been very crystal clear with the Fiscal Advisory Committee that it is an advisory committee, and the board makes the decision, and the board is in charge of the budget. I think one of the things that is a perception in the community is people haven't known who's in charge, whether prior superintendents have, given the impression that they're in charge of the finance, and it rests with the board. So I hope, because whoever gets elected is going to inherit this, that the parameters have been set very clearly as you go out for information from the community. That is advisory, and the buck rests with the board.
That's a good point, Cynthia, and it has been very clear from the get-go that this body is an advisory group that makes a recommendation to the superintendent, and she mulls it over with her cabinet and then brings it to the board.
Okay. And then when you bring those recommendations to the board, do you plan on having because in Kentfield, when we had to do this, we did a similar process. And then when recommendations were brought and recommendations were tiered, right? So whether it's by your those categories or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, probably wouldn't use that now because behavior support uses tier 1, tier 2, 3. So you probably moved to yours. And then we had a special budget study session so that more parents could then come and talk who may not have been involved in the process. And so we could hear. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
And then the final thing, it sounds like the Fiscal Advisory Committee is getting ready. They did the prioritization exercise and getting ready to at least come up with some initial recommendations, but you still have an open survey out to the community and to staff and to parents and to students. What are you doing with that, right? Because if recommendations are coming from the Fiscal Advisory Committee, but you're still creating the illusion that you're collecting information on priorities from community members, how's that going to sync?
If it's a short answer, you can. Otherwise, we'll.
Yeah, or you can,
provide
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that that's
No, it's a
something
good-
that
that's a-
hearing in the
yeah.
audience, because I think
Yeah.
the survey's open until October 5th.
Yeah.
And yet the budget meeting, the next Fiscal Advisory Committee meeting's next Monday. And so really, right. So
Are you going to
just-
fold those?
Yeah.
Would you like to answer?
Okay.
it? Yeah.
So we have another budget study committee on October 1st, to refine the work that they've done. And then The surveys close October 5th. Corbett is getting feedback from staffs. And then October 17th, we have another budget study committee and fiscal advisory. I've got my committees mixed up because I
Sorry,
wrote them
I
down. Fiscal advisory will meet again, and that's when we will start what we're calling layering in the feedback from the various stakeholder groups. And we have a couple of meetings for that because it's going to be a lot of data. But we did, the survey does have a prioritization within it also, so we're hoping to streamline some of it. But so this next meeting is for them to continue to, we're going to bring their own work back to them so they can see because we took their input and compiled it. So it won't be until after the survey close and after Corbett has spoken to all of the sites. We also have 3 community meetings, October 2nd, October 10th, and October 11th that have been communicated out. We will also take feedback at that point. So by October 17th, we plan on having quite a bit of information to start sharing with them and start layering that feedback in. But thank you. It's a good point. Oh, and the LCAP committee group is also going to go through this process. And then the LCAP committee group will then join the fiscal advisory committee group for 2 meetings when we really start to synthesize this feedback.
So you had, someone had mentioned whether you combine the Citizens Oversight Committee for the parcel tax with the, no, don't, right? Because the Citizens Oversight Committee has very specific people that are pulled out of the community.
I was referring to Mill Valley's other thing. I wasn't referring to the parcel tax.
But you said that, and you don't want to do that
Yeah.
because the Citizens Oversight Committee is specifically for the parcel tax revenue, has to have a taxpayer advocate on there, has to have certain categories of people on there that probably shouldn't be involved in looking at the 5-year plan, 10-year plan for the school district, unless they have expertise that would lend to that. And then that board tracking slide about cost savings to date. A good way to get it out to the community is to put a link in every one of your board highlight memos that goes out. And kind of have a running total, and then that gets the message out that you're working on this, that you're already recognizing cost savings. So,
Thank you very much. It was nice, Tara, hearing all 3 of you talking about all these various activities, and what it reminds me of was I don't remember what month it was, but it was last school year, and I remember it was once, I think I was having a meeting with Tarina Mares, and we were talking about the fact that it appeared that we were definitely going to have to making some reductions, and she is a seasoned veteran and commented that so long as we go through a transparent, logical process, that the community and the parents know that the process is being followed and they have an opportunity to engage step by step. When you get there, it will not create chaos and hysteria, is the only way she put it. And it's difficult, and so I really applaud you because that's exactly what you're doing, and you're open to suggestions, and we're going to get through this. So thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
No, you're welcome. Thank you. And those are great suggestions. And it just also brought something up that at the next board meeting, what we will have for you is a pretty detailed timeline of a backwards plan timeline from when we anticipate me bringing a recommendation to you back through all of the steps that we will be taking. So I think that will also be helpful for the community to see all of the things that, the full calendar of processes that we went through.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. That's really very encouraging that you're making such progress.
Thanks. I do feel the need to say that I just want to make sure we remember that we did reduce some positions and that people don't forget.
You did.
Last year. That Kim Stifler is now covering both Tamascal and Senior Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and that my former position of Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services was not backfilled. I just don't want us to lose sight that we have actually already reduced positions, and that, we're keeping up with that work. Yeah, and we didn't hire additional
and
APs.
all the way back to the print shop.
Right.
And that's something that we started this a couple of years ago, so, in terms of reductions. So.
Can I ask one more question? Do I have to go and ask it?
I'm afraid you do.
So, What is the number, the average number? So when you say, think about the cost of hiring a teacher, what's the number that the district works with? 137. Okay, and what about for classified?
Really varies.
I know, but at average, okay, it's too much, okay, all right. So that's just a good number to have in the, right, so that when people, if it does come down to reductions, 137. Okay, great.
Total compensation.
Right.
Yeah, the whole package.
Very good.
Tara, you can't figure out where to sit.
Yeah, I think we're ready.
Can I follow up on that? So
Of course,
if
yeah.
there's going to be a historical sort of reference slide that you're
Yeah.
referring to about other areas where we've achieved cost savings, since corporate wasn't in this role before, it might be worth just kind of circulating. Are we forgetting anything?
Yeah, no, it's true. Because
Could
we've
it,
done so
right?
much.
Because we have
Yeah.
done a lot of things. So, for example, just like the solar panels at Redwood, we had these projections on what we were saving, and I don't know that we've had it come back recently in terms of sort of assessing where do we stand in terms of achieving those savings. But that would be, I mean, there's all sorts of things
Yeah,
that you may,
yeah.
that one of us might not think of, but
Yeah.
others sitting
be
around the
good to
table might.
circulate.
So it might be worth just kind of, what am I missing? Is there something else out there?
Off the top of my head, maybe I can take a first stab at an arbitrary window going back X number of years. I can bring it to cabinet. We could flesh it out some more. I can iterate back here, part of my budget update like we've been doing. I mean, it's great for people to see, for you guys to comment on it in live. So I can start on that with
Yeah,
cabinet.
that's good.
Great.
Thank you.
So now on to Board Policy 3300.
All right, so this is my first board policy update, so I'll give it a whirl. So first reading BP 3300, Business and Non-Instructional Operations. I'm not going to read the rationale to this to you. It's right in front of you, but the idea is this has been a practice that we've had in place for the last month. This originated from this summer when our former co-interim superintendent, Dr. Valerie Pitts, brought her level of expertise in over the summer and looked at areas from her fresh perspective where we can be more efficient. If our resources are squeezed, where can we be more efficient? And this is one of the areas that jumped out at her. That this board policy formally required that all contracts over $7,500 were required to come to the board for formal approval. The proposed change, again, this is a first reading, no action tonight, would be to raise that to $40,000. And the rationale behind that is several reasons. One, primarily business efficiency. The amount of time that staff spends, which hit me hard when I came on board, processing all of these, bringing them to Mary, getting them uploaded for the agenda, backloading them, was significant. There would be no change at all to our practice of how we staff would be viewing these with critical eyes. I sign off on every single one. We make sure it's my responsibility to make sure that we're spending our resources appropriately. So the process wouldn't change, just the limit would change to $40,000. The reason we brought this forward is that Dr. Pitts and I did a quick little survey of surrounding districts. And we found, that this policy for us originated in, I believe, 1994. And if you think about inflation from 1994 till now, you can do the math, we're at a much larger place than we were back then. But when we looked at surrounding districts, we had some of our feeder districts who are smaller districts financially and numerically in terms of number of students, be anywhere in the range from $30,000 to $50,000 to $60,000 to no limit. Dr. Pitts and I didn't feel like no limit was relevant, but we literally looked at, there was several at 30, several at 50, and we looked at 40 as being a welcome in between. There's no science behind that number, just an arbitrary number that we thought resonated with us when we looked at some of our purchase orders. The only other difference in this proposed board policy is removing some language. There used to be some old bond language, Measure A, that has some specific requirements related to that. All of Measure A bond resources have been exhausted, so I've redlined that out, removed them to make our proposed BP as streamlined as possible.
I have a question.
Sure.
It has to do with the practice of some agencies. You'll get approval, you'll do a contract less than the ceiling, that in this case, let's say it's a $35,000 contract, but you amend that contract fairly frequently, and suddenly it's a $300,000 contract, but it never had to go to the governing body. Because and so sometimes there'll be a limit that you only can increase the contract value by 50%, for instance, and then you have to go back to the governing body. And that's my only concern about some of these things. Not that there's any ill thinking in doing so. Suddenly, sometimes you'll find out about a huge contract, and so that's maybe my only question. And I don't know if you have any policy on that now, or how you look at that.
That's a great question. I haven't thought about that and I'm not aware of any other BP or ARs that tend to that.
Of course, here, it's every year anyway, so maybe we would.
It is every year.
Yeah, so that would keep that from happening, I suppose.
Well, but even
Unless
within a year, I guess.
Yeah, you could amend it and we wouldn't know about it. You'd amend it and it.
Technically, we could, but I think the practice has been anything, if it was, I'm making this up, but if we had a contract that was $30,000 and midway through the year, speaking with Wes, he felt like there's a particular need at a site because of a crisis to raise those services up by $20,000 for 20 plus 30 is 50.
So then you would bring it back?
I think the spirit would be that would require superintendent approval.
Okay, that was
in
my
cabinet,
question.
and then we bring it back to the board. So that's a fair question.
Yeah, okay.
But you're right, we are protected within 1 year.
Yeah, so you would take the sum, okay.
A practice where if any one vendor had a combined amount that was over.
Okay, good, okay. I won't say what city I used to work at, that happened a lot.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Fair question.
That's good, that's good.
Yeah, we had a situation a few years ago where we had a public relations consultant, and the superintendent was billing out at $7,400 intervals.
Thank you for sharing that information.
What?
Thank you.
Long time, but so, not this superintendent, many years ago, and not our previous one either.
Previous one.
So, I think it's really important that when things go, when the billings go over that $40,000 limit, that it all comes, that it's made public, transparent, and comes to the board.
Because it is something
The second thing is, I've had a couple of, what should I say, theorists looking for a conspiracy.
What are you going to say?
Yeah, theorists looking for a conspiracy, asking about why are we doing this, which I explained. But I think this is before this agenda came out, and it's before the board minutes from the last meeting came out. But I think these minutes should clearly reflect the language that's in the agenda. This revision raises the superintendent's purchase, et cetera, from $7,500. But if we could just cut and paste that and put it in the minutes, I think it makes this action much more transparent and less suspect.
With the clarification too, that you would come back if you had a combined sum over that if you amended it. I think the more, so Mary, you're probably hearing us say all this, but.
And to your point, we're also trying to implement best budgeting practices. The idea of if we're encumbering funds, we want to know that our projection for this year is we're making a good faith estimate of what our projections are. And what you described not only is not transparent, but also not good budgeting practice, even if you're assuming positive intent. So that's another, the spirit of this. The business office, when they heard this was coming potentially forward for consideration, there was a palpable uproar of just relief at the potential.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
As we talked about in the student trustee orientation, Friday afternoons before a board meeting, being the deadlines to get uploaded, that can be a very, the stress in the business office to process all these with these deadlines and the frequency
for sure.
coming through was a lot.
Yes. $7,500 was a lot of money in 1994.
Well, absolutely, and I don't want to minimize. I don't want to minimize that, but
How much time has it freed up, do you think?
a lot. Again, I've only been here for a couple months, but hold on, is the 2 or 3 Fridays before board meetings were noticeably stressful in my office. The 2 or 3 since we began this practice, didn't even notice it. So that's a positive thing.
It's also, that extends across the staff, right? Yeah, I was saying July would be a nightmare for us because we'd have one board meeting in July, and that's the turnover of our fiscal year, and all of our major contracts come due, and we would be scrambling, to make sure that they got to, the business office at a time when they're already rolling over the payroll and all of that. We then would have stacks of POs that we were also trying to process.
It sends to the sites with the budget secretaries as well. They're on hold to. Also, to be clear, you will still be approving the vendor warrants as they come out. So and that will go to the public. There's nothing different. It's just the efficiency of moving these through quicker with the authorization.
Do you have something?
Nope, I'm good.
So I'm not sure, I thought that Leslie and Chuck raised interesting issues with respect to this sort of aggregate idea, and I'm not sure where we've landed on it. And I'm not sure that it's enough just to say that it's in sort of the spirit of the policy that you would bring that back to the board, because we've seen that, the interpretation of the spirit of a particular practice sometimes frequently may depend upon who's doing the interpreting. And so I'm wondering whether we should add to this policy some language that talks about, an aggregate payments, of having that be a threshold to a particular vendor in a given fiscal year. If it reaches that, then that also would trigger a requirement for board approval. And I don't want to draft it on the fly, but I think that would be an appropriate addition to the policy.
I agree.
All right.
Thank you.
I think an aggregate amount for a defined service, because if we have a vendor who's doing, a whole bunch of different separate things, 8,000 here, 12,000 here, but they're separate and discrete, that's one thing. But if you've got a single project that's going over.
Yeah.
Well,
In the past, it's always been to any single vendor, too.
Is it? Okay, I'm good with
That would
that.
be another way someone might.
Skirt around it.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, that's the easiest way to track it is by vendor. So it's the
Yeah.
same reason.
Well, thank you.
Great.
Can I
So
just comment?
I'll plan to bring.
We have another comment coming.
Please, Barbara. Yes.
I am very impressed and pleased to hear that there's really a dynamic. You're responding to your staff, and I haven't heard that very much. And it's so important because I hear it when I go out, just one-on-one. But to make sure that our staff gets a fair and reasonable opportunity to do their jobs, where in this case, July sounds horrible. And that is not what we want to do. And it also then establishes more than spirit, but a practice, so that it's we're not responding. The classified doesn't have to be burdened by overtime hours under pressure.
Yeah.
And that helps our budget practice as well.
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased to hear the dynamics that are going on and that we're getting to hear that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We've been having the mantra, we're all working hard enough, we need to work smarter, and where we have control of
Yes,
things, we
please.
need to work as efficient as we can. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
So do I dare ask the student trustees, this is when it gets really interesting in our meeting. Do you have any questions or anything? You're all being so polite. Okay, we'll move on. So now we go to, thank you, Corbett, really appreciate it, and Lars too, thank you. So now we'll move on, oops, I thought I heard somebody. We'll move on to the trustee reports. And we can start wherever you'd like, whoever wants to
Can we
jump
have
in.
the student trustee reports? Can we throw them in here?
They're not on the agenda, but if they'd like to, they can.
They're
I don't
all
think- did we
sitting
prepare
here.
you? Did he ask you ahead of time to repair anything? I just don't want to.
I wasn't asked to.
Yeah.
You
Why
weren't,
don't we
okay.
wait? Let's just wait, yeah, because,
Next meeting.
yeah.
Okay. It's just nice that you're all here, and I didn't know if you had come prepared with anything, so. Does anybody else want to go first?
I'll go for it.
Chuck.
I'll go for it. Okay, I went to the Tamascal open house, got there a little late, missed the principal's intro, hung out in the CEC. They're pretty packed this year. This morning, see, Barbara's getting very interested in this, as she would. I went, bid the team students farewell on their Sierra trip, and then I went into Kathy Flores's language of humor class, which Michael had visited on back to school night. And it was like, why did I never go in this class before? It was fabulous. I think it's fabulous, but that's because I'm a boy, and she's got 3 sections, 14 girls. This is all boys, and at first I was a little sort of horrified that, oh my God, we got this gender disparity. But then it was like, thank God we have some electives that appeal to boys. So she's got a great reading list. But the interesting thing to me is that she is Kathy is a hardcore English teacher, passing herself off as a comedy impresario at Redwood, so that they're doing all this comedy stuff, looking at the theory of comedy, how you do comedy, but there are also some really solid, hardcore writing and decoding skills in there that Barbara would love it. Barbara would be just happy as a lark that this is going on. So, for instance, today the students were deconstructing. They had to pick out a comedy. And that was fun because I'm going around and they've all got their laptops there and they're looking at a YouTube, a different YouTube. Everyone. And then they have to deconstruct that and write a paper. And then she's got this list of all these things they cannot do on the paper. Using the passive voice, and then these words that, very and pretty and, and all this stuff, and, anytime she sees that, she's just going to reject the paper and they're going to have to start all over again. And then after that, I went into the class that Mitch Cohen had told me was far and away the best class at Redwood. And that happens to be Mitch Cohen's Mitch Cohen's AP Environmental Science class. And I'd watched Mitch for years and years and years, looking out my window at Tamascal, and the whole class is walking up to do a restoration project on the creek. This went on for years, but I haven't been into the class. But they were doing some real very it's early in the year, some really foundational stuff. Phosphorus cycle, nitrogen cycle, things like that. But real science, good class, interesting. That's it for me.
Oh, JLAC.
What?
JLAC. Do you have anything to report about that?
Oh, JLAC. Well, the big thing was the
What does
concern.
JLAC stand for, Chuck?
Joint Legislative Action Committee, and this is crucial. Barbara will give you the date. In January, a whole bus of trustees and student trustees from Marin is going to go up to Sacramento to the Capitol. There's an expression that you never want to see sausage or laws made. You get to go up to Sacramento and see the sausage that's in the laws. Why are these things happening? Well, you've got lobbyists up there, you've got legislative assistants, you've got our assemblyman, Mark Levine, and then Mike McGuire, our state senator. All coming in and talking to the group about how this stuff is done. A few years ago, a group of students got to go visit the governor in his office, and he told them to to quit school and get a real education. They came back, so like, and one of the lobbyists goes, he was in one of those moods again. But that's a fabulous opportunity. So you should absolutely cut school and go to that. You'll learn much more than you can in a day of class at wherever you are. So at JLAC, the only important, the real crucial thing that was discussed has already been dealt with, and that is Governor Brown did not sign the 8:30 school start bill.
Thank you, Chuck. Okay, you three, who wants to go next?
Okay. The only thing I have to report is to remind us all that while we're starting suicide prevention activities in October, we also have Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and that's very important to certainly our community, and I hope that students and staff will be participating in activities probably through wellness. So I'll be anxious to hear from students what will be going on sites, and want again thank this community for all its support to those of us who have had experiences with breast cancer. It is very important. You never know when that's going to come up for you, and when it does, to all the work that you have done, licking those stamps, making a contribution, becoming aware, is very important for lots of us who are survivors. And I want to thank you all again for that.
Thank you, Barbara.
So it's normally Laura who takes my thunder away, but this time you took my thunder away, Chuck, by talking about Kathy Flores' class, which I was going to mention. So anyway, three things. I attended the Fiscal Advisory Committee meeting, and there was a good presentation about that. And then I attended the 2 back-to-school nights, one at Tamalpais. I thought first time for Kim as the principal. I thought she did very well. Had a chance to we had a chance to meet with a parent, and there were, I think, 4 of us, right? He had Chuck and I and Kim and our illustrious new superintendent, all 4 on 1, and one parent, one Tamalpais parent. And he actually was very supportive of Tamalpais and the program. And then I was at Redwood Back to School Night. And just one thing I would add is I just happened to wander into Kathy Flores' class and I was just tickled. I did not know that this humor was one of the robust electives that was referred to even earlier. And then later in the evening, because I haven't been in any of the, this year I hadn't been in any of the portables, I wandered out into Steve Hedelman's class, and he teaches the same thing. and it was actually interesting to see how they presented a little bit differently to the parents. So I don't know what the breakdown is for his classes and whether he has a similar gender breakdown. That was obviously I couldn't tell what the gender breakdown was by looking at kids' parents. But anyway, it's back to school night. I thought at both campuses was very strong. The one thing that was different at Redwood this year was there was a lot more time given in the passing periods. And I got the sense that there was a certain amount of staring at each other because parents were actually a little better at getting from class to class than I think maybe folks thought it was going to be. And so there was a certain amount of like watching the clock, can we get started yet kind of thing. And frankly, part of the fun of Back to School Night at Redwood is having people slam into each other because they're really worried about trying to get to their next class. So I think we ought to go back to the shorter periods next year.
Thank you.
I also was at Fiscal Advisory, but we went over that. Tamalpais, Back to School Night. I wasn't able to stick around long, but I really liked how our new principal, Kim, tried something different. I liked what you did too, Corbett, but Kim had workshops, and I thought that was interesting how, the parents could actually talk to each other. I did miss the student presentations, which you had, Corbett. That was, hearing the student voice at Tamascal is always really interesting. The food never disappoints at Tamascal, so that was great. I also checked out 2 different sporting events. I always look for sportsmanship when I go to whoever's playing, and whenever we can get 2 of our comprehensive sites on the same field or court or whatever it is, I'm getting a big bang for my buck. And I went to see Tam's new field hockey team play Redwood's team, and it was terrific to see all the parents that were there supporting, and it's Tam's first year, and they had a great bench and were competitive. So I felt good about that. That's something that we've done as a district, is offer another sport for a lot more girls. And then I also happened upon the Redwood Marin Catholic volleyball game, and that was a barn burner. It's always interesting with Marin Catholic. We have strong rivalry with that school, but the sportsmanship was terrific. I talked to Jessica Peisch, our athletic director, on the side, and she told me we have 1 freshman on the Redwood team, and it's just, I think volleyball in particular, girls volleyball, is very, they are demonstrably very in tune with each other, and it's kind of a nice thing to do, to see them doing something outside of the classroom. I also went to the Hannah Project open house. They have been shut down. They were displaced, I think is what Betty Hodges said, for 2 years, and they reopened at what used to be a church. I can't remember which one, in Marin City. And so there were a lot of people there supporting Betty in opening the doors again, and I had a chance to talk to Betty, and I know that Tara, you were there, and I think Michael, you were there, and so was Leslie. I can't remember if you 2 were there,
Last
but
year.
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
The old site, right before it shut down, there was a forum where a bunch of administrators and parents and some students from Marin City got together, and we talked about really important issues, and that was a big event for me, because it was a very rich discussion. And so I talked to Betty about resurrecting that, and I think that's important for us as a district, to keep our Marin City families engaged however we can. And so that was a fun event. And then finally, there are 2 more things. The cost meeting last night, I attended that with Leslie. Corbett was there also. And that was the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers. They had a gathering and had a speaker there. And I guess I'll just say the big takeaway for me, and it's nothing new, but it underscored for me that we really need to focus on the cost side of our ledger. We're looking at the revenue side with our parcel tax, but the cost side is really what our focus needs to be, and I think we all know that, but we need to take a look at why we have a structural deficit and come up with a sustainable model. So that was good. And the nice thing about that meeting is that there were people from all over Southern Marin with different political viewpoints, and everyone behaved well, and we ate together, and there was a lot of healthy discussion, and it was a nice demonstration of how democracy should work. And then finally, the parcel tax campaign committee, on which I sit as one of the 2 trustees. Information only at a school board meeting, but I'm encouraged by the progress that they're making. We're working a lot on endorsements, fundraising, and now we're getting into a lot of the field work, getting out there, knocking on doors, and phone banking, and precinct walks. So, yeah, there's a lot going on. And then Golden Bell, we are meeting next week, And that's it.
Could I have a comment? Could I, please? I just, by way of history again, the Language of Humor course, just to share how curriculum has been developed. Some of us in advanced placement, language and comp, for example, when we had our students took the test in May, that gave us a month of school left with youngsters who were exhausted, of course. So one of the opportunities there provided was to do a unit that was easy to handle, that could provide some analysis without the heavy burden. So some of us did start this a unit on comedy. That was way back, it was 10 years ago. So to see that happens around here, people do take initiatives to use their time to develop something that could, as this has, grow. So I like the fact that you can work in a district where that's possible as a professional, and it shows up here being a really growing and worthwhile experience for kids. That's it.
Thank you.
And for kids who hate English.
So I'll give you a brief update of what I did and then move on to a very short president's report. But I also, as you know, I went to the Redwood open house, and the energy was just different somehow this year. I can't put my finger on it, but I really enjoyed it at the beginning. I had to leave early, but I really loved hearing the teachers get introduced. In addition, with Laura Anderson, I work on the Parcel Tax Committee in my free time away from the district, not using any resources of the district. And it's full steam ahead, so on your personal email accounts, you'll be getting some information about if you'd like to go for a nice walk on Saturday. You have 3 choices. And that's keeping us busy. I also listened to David Kramer last night, governed California, and my takeaway was, it's just very clear. There's many people. I think as a state we're concerned about what's happening because of our underfunded pensions and what's going to happen at the state level, at the economy, let alone all the school districts. And that's a given. I mean, it's something we all have to tackle. And, we kind of got this thing dumped on us by the state. And so there's a lot of people have very strong feelings, and what was nice, as you were saying, there was a range, but there was a lot of people in the room that were trustees, administrators, and at the end, after hearing quite a bit, I thought were messages along the lines of just tell the school board not to do X, Y, Z. Some of it was very, very, very kind of all or nothing kind of an approach. And to have 2 people get up that were able to show the crowd that we're all on the same side, and that the room was full of people from education, Marin, and we were there wanting to have a conversation. And I was really happy because I did like hearing the range of feelings and concern that people had. It was actually pretty helpful. The one thing, though, that came out of it, and we've talked about it tonight, out of that meeting and what we've learned the last year, I know we've all talked about it at board meetings about getting in front of things, is that this whole idea of transparency, it's not just putting something on a website and going like this, hoping you find it. We really have a good story to tell. And people want to know what's going on, and I think thank you to the superintendent that a lot more is going out to the public, and it only helps for the community to feel engaged and then be part of the solution when we hit a time like this where we're looking at the budget. So transparency isn't just it's not always that easy to help people and to reach people and find ways to help them understand, and everyone's got busy lives. So I'm just really pleased we're moving in that direction as a district. I think it's really important. So it's been an interesting couple weeks. And I guess are we allowed to tell them the latest endorsements, or no? Can we say that? It's information, or no?
I think we can.
Okay.
It's on.
But have you looked at the website lately to see who's endorsed the parcel text? Can we say this? I don't know. It's information.
information,
So
yeah.
League of Women Voters, Gavin Newsom, Jared Huffman, a lot of the Board of Supervisors, people are coming through the
Mark
woodwork.
Levine, Mike McGuire.
Yeah, so and so what was said last night, what made me think was Mary Jane Burke spoke, and she thought, well, we're going to go talk to Gavin about the pension issue.
Good.
Yeah, so, among many other things, but, so, because we value our teachers and are classified, and but we also, it's not one or the other, so. So the next item is board communications, and I ran out of batteries, so I had to shut my laptop down. There was one item that was the board communication, a letter announcing Redwood English teacher Tom Sievertson, did I say his name? Sievertson's Outstanding Educator Award. And I was going to read the letter that was in our packet, but I said it. Oh, it is? Oh, great.
Yeah, there you go. Very good.
Oh, shoot, my glasses. So I have to say, I was sorry about this because this email must have ended up in my Barracuda. I'm getting a lot, I don't know about the rest of
Yeah.
you, but I'm getting a lot of Barracuda email, junk mail. And that's the only thing I can think of is it was in there because I somehow missed this. So I just thought this was so great to get this, and I'll just read it. I am pleased to, Dr. Pitts, I am pleased to inform you that one of your teachers, Tom Sievertson, has been selected for the University of Chicago's Outstanding Educator Award. This distinguished award has existed for more than 3 decades. Each year, we invite entering first-year students to nominate an educator who has influenced them, challenged them, or helped them along the path toward intellectual growth. We receive letters back from hundreds of students inspired by teachers who have changed the course of their lives, who taught them to reimagine text, to delve deeper into problem solving, and to think beyond the borders of the classroom in the pursuit of their own education. As an institution that prides itself on being committed to the life of the mind, we at the University of Chicago are heartened to see that your schools foster and support such outstanding individuals. Our sincerest congratulations to both you and your faculty for the continued support of excellence. We hope that you will share this good news with your community. Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Chicago. So I will be writing him and congratulating him on behalf of the board, since we all must have gotten this. I don't know if you got it in your email. I
didn't see it.
You didn't see it either? Okay. I'm getting about 20 in that Barracuda, and then I sometimes it all looks like junk mail and it's gone, and I'm wondering if this got accidentally put there. So that's great news. It's very exciting.
So, Leslie, if I could say just something about Tom, I had not seen this. So, who's our Redwood? Lauren, are you on the BARC?
Yeah.
Okay, so Tom, for many years, Tom was the faculty advisor to the BARC, and my youngest daughter, Madeline, was editor-in-chief when Tom, and I mean, she effectively lived and breathed BARC during her last 2 years here.
Wow.
And Tom was just absolutely instrumental. I mean, I saw it very closely, but just absolutely instrumental in her development as a student and as a person. And I, in particular, I saw it where he maintained contact. Where students who left the BARC, who had shared these experiences with him, would reach out to him after graduation and continued to maintain that relationship, and then just sort of the mutual sort of pride and connections that he made. And so I could not be more pleased and with the fact that he's recognized for the great work that he's done. So bravo.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I add, please?
Of course you can.
Tom had to fill very, very big shoes. I think, as you all know, the Redwood BARC and the other papers as well, but certainly the Redwood BARC at Redwood has developed a tradition really around around journalism nationally. So to come in to fill those shoes, tremendous job to do. And he built the program and developed it, and our daughter as well was a part of the BARC, and it got her into Medill School of Journalism, where she hung on by her thumbs, but nonetheless, a tremendous opportunity for her personally. But I also worked with Tom. I was Nonfiction 1 and worked with him, collaborated with him to send students into the BARC. And again, I'm just so delighted that he's finally getting some recognition, long overdue. He deserves it very much.
I had a Barky too. One of my kids was a Bark kid, and
Yep.
Tom's he's a terrific teacher. I'm so pleased to see that he got this recognition. He deserved it.
So that's great. So if you need it, Lauren, it's part of the agenda packet if you hadn't seen it already for the BARC. That's great.
I think they spelled it wrong.
I don't know how, sorry. So how that's done at Alameda?
When a teacher gets something like that from University of Chicago or Stanford or Smith, or the schools that we get them from, it's announced at a staff meeting. And I don't know if that was done, because you're all saying very nice things about Tom, but he's not here.
I know. We'll
And
have
he's
to
not
give him
hearing
the
it.
link.
So teachers, at Alameda, it's announced at a staff meeting.
Yeah.
The principal reads the
Yeah.
letter, and then they get it at the staff meeting.
Yeah, that's
So.
good. Yeah.
And my daughter also had Tom, so.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So it's nice. It's sure nice to finish the meeting on such a very positive note. And now it's time for public comments for items not on the agenda. Do we have anyone here that would like to make a comment on an item not on the agenda? So are you sure? I'm just joking. Okay, thank you. That concludes.